Good morning. My name is Reverend Addae Kraba, minister of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of New Braunfels. We are a welcoming, progressive community of seekers who come from a wide range of religious and socioeconomic backgrounds. We seek to share a journey of spiritual growth together while respecting the individual's right to freedom of belief. With an abundance of care and compassion for the health and safety of our congregation, we have closed the doors of our building at 135 Alvis Lane in New Braunfels until further notice. Meanwhile, I sincerely hope that you enjoy our virtual services that are held each Sunday at 10:30. In this hour, may this flame, this virtual flame, the symbol of our faith, be a beacon of hope and a sign of our quest for truth, meaning, and wholeness. Good morning and Happy New Year. May the time we spend in this virtual gathering renew hope, refresh courage, lift spirits, inspire and invigorate our resolve to care for each other. May it be so. This morning, our reading, Borderlands, was written by Susan Manker Seal. She begins, I am continually astounded by people who point to the struggle for the rights of African Americans in the 1960s and say that we have done nothing comparable since. They somehow slept through the farm workers' struggles and the gender wars of the 70s, the sanctuary movement of the 80s, and the fight for gay and lesbian rights in the 80s and 90s, all of which still go on today. They don't make the connection that the bravery Rosa Parks showed when she refused to give up her seat on the bus is the same kind of bravery our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters must call forth just to hold hands with their lovers in public. It's the same fight. It's the same fight for respect and dignity for every human being. And it's a religious fight, a fight about what's important in the world. To love your brother and sister as yourself, and to love your God, the mystery, the universal, the spirit of life and love, the symbol of all that is good and holy in the world, that which is beyond our knowing, but is the grandest of all, to love that with all your heart and all your soul. Religions are far from infallible. There are transient elements in the way we worship and boundaries which we cannot or will not yet see or confront as people of faith. These are the borderlands, places where we all are challenged by the different and strange. What do we find difficult to see? Who among us has the vision? What revelations hover in our hearts and minds? These are the edges of the future. There ends our reading. Imagining peace. Many years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to members of the clergy and concerned laity. And I quote, "A time comes when silence is betrayal. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is the most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men and women do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do in the case of dreadful conflict, we are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. But we must move on and we must speak. End of quote. Now, Dr. King was speaking of the war in Vietnam, but his words are as relevant today because we are at war in so many ways. This is an extraordinary historical tense moment in the United States. We live in a world of upheaval with violent challenges to the status quo. A president who fans the flames of threats to use force against peaceful protesters, increasing police brutality, racism, and a Defense Department leadership initially complicit in using the military for partisan purposes during a pandemic, no less. Realists believe the cycle of violence is just the way of the world. Idealists believe if we can just stop the fighting, a natural state of peace will return. After all, no one is against peace. I believe that at our basic human level, everyone desires constructive, fruitful growth, dislikes destruction, and wishes to live in peace. But to live in a peace-filled world, we must begin to imagine peace as a possibility. Peace building embraces both the realist and the idealist positions. Moreover, peace is not just the absence of war, because violence erupts when people are suffering, where populations have surged, resources are scarce, and prospects are bleak. For several years past now, all these elements have lay in wait, a tinderbox to be ignited in a communal explosion. The issues related to homelessness, hunger, dysfunctional social, economic, health, and penal systems conjoin in the lack of peace in communities around the globe. Some American commentators compare the protests in America's streets to the uprisings against Middle East dictators. Because in both cases, the people protesting believe that, as the writer Stephen A. Cook puts it, political institutions of the state and the prevailing social orders have combined to rob them of their dignity. War provides an outlet for vengeance, an avenue for getting what one wants, taking it by force. Now I ask, how does this differ from wars born out of the Situation Room to fight wars on foreign shores? But if enough people decide that one more day of what causes the conflict is one day too many, shifting the consciousness to that of the way of peace, that is all it takes. I know it sounds rather trite and simplistic, but rather than wishing that others will stop the killing, you become a force, and in doing so, make the ultimate contribution. Imagine the world that we would live in if a global shift in consciousness occurred. We would all return to the center of our true being, recognize our interconnectedness, and peace would reign. Deepak Chopra suggests that the idea of peace is based on the same factors that ushered in the age of science. When people witnessed demonstrations of steam engines, vaccines, and electric lights. They adapted to them based on the level of their own awareness. A shift in consciousness occurred because the idea of a human existence and being content to read by candlelight, travel by horse and buggy, suffer high rates of women dying during childbirth, and short lifespans became unacceptable. A leap in consciousness took place. The barriers of ignorance and superstition existed before every new age dawned. When I think of peace, I think of harmony and balance. And currently, as a species, we are so very unbalanced and out of step with the rhythms of each other and the planet we live on. However, peace is a process, not a thing or a journey. It is a flow and the interrelationship of complex forces that produces harmony and balance. Thich Nhat Hanh informs in the book, Peace is Every Step, that the way to becoming a peaceful society is being mindful of what we say and do, to recognize the negative internal formations before they manifest. That applies to feelings of anger, resentment, and fear. Fear of things real or imagined is one of the most damaging emotions, because if we live in the mode of fear, we are outside of the emotion of love. Sometimes the fear is as simple as being afraid that while we are engaging in a discussion, we will not be listened to, or we will be misunderstood, or the content of our side of the conversation will be misconstrued. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron tells us that the reason why so many of us feel vulnerable and helpless is because of violence and wars that flare up all over the world. She continues saying that the origin of aggression, hatred, and war lays nowhere but within our own hearts and minds. The ways in which we as individuals respond to challenges in everyday life can either perpetuate a culture of violence or help create a new culture of compassion, because it begins in the heart. And it's never too late to look within and discover a new way of being, to personally transform, and thereby helping our world to transform. I'm certain that most of you have heard the slogan, think locally, act globally. Well, that same principle applies to our living. To create change, we must begin to change internally if we want to see a physical manifestation of change. If we are truly serious about peace, we must first be peace with our individual disarmament, taking a closer look at our personal wars and reducing personal emotions of hostility and suspicion. The divisions of duality run incredibly deep, but the way of peace goes beyond duality. It calls for abolishing the way of us versus them. As Unitarian Universalists, it is the only way to fulfilling our sixth principle of building a fair and peaceful world. We must stop dehumanizing as a way of disconnecting with the rhetoric of they hate us and probably always will. We must destroy them or they will destroy us. Who are they and us when we all live in the same communities, pay taxes to the same system of government, share the same resources, and live on the same planet? No matter how we argue the pros and cons politically, if nothing else is abundantly clear, it should be that globally, we are subject to fall from the same unseen force that became a pandemic. The collaborative scientific approach now is to save lives, plural, lives. Why can't that same approach be taken to create a more just and equitable world, eradicating poverty and marginalization of brown and Black people, thereby preventing scarce resources and bleak prospects, robbing individuals of their dignity? It was Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the most progressive first ladies to ever live in the White House, who said, and I quote, "If civilization is to survive, our people must turn to love not as a doctrine, but as a way of living," end of quote. Again, Chopra reminds us that to end war, it is not enough to think of ending one conflict or even 30 conflicts. What we must end is the idea of war and the habit of war, which has turned into the constancy of war. We have watched how the population of homelessness has grown in this country over the past 20 years. So much so that it has become acceptable as a subculture found in every major metropolitan city. New policies are not created with a humane approach to the plight of their citizens. Instead, barriers and structures are built with them in mind as deterrents to society, further robbing them of their dignity. Benches at bus stops are now built with more partitions to prevent people sleeping on them. There are laws in place to penalize with arrests for feeding hungry people. Our struggles are the struggles of the world, because as our first principle reminds us, there is inherent worth and dignity in all human beings. And this is a time when there is great risk for some in speaking what is most important to them, or of having it misunderstood. But it is always such a time, and the risk of not speaking is almost always greater still. Silence, conformity, acquiescence to the loudest, most nationalistic or militaristic majority view, just because it is simpler or clearer, or even if it speaks to a portion of your own emotional response. None of this is worthy in times like these. More policies are not the answers, because true sanctity is in the place where your mind stretches to meet that of someone else, the sacred meeting ground of minds and hearts. Emerson reminds us that, and I quote, "Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind," end of quote. The most significant obstacle to achieving world peace is that those who believe new policies are always the answer are most in need of reforming the tenets they hold in their hearts, because they do not hold out much hope for humankind to be whole and fully human. They have no interest in peacemaking. Moreover, the majority are bystanders to a belief that war is necessary, with rhetoric like it fuels the economy, it protects the homeland. I disagree, because what I do know is that it kills. Those who survive return broken in mind, body, and spirit, with no access to mental and physical health care, resulting in broken families, and further continuing widening the social economic gaps in a vicious cycle. It begins with the hearts of the people we put in charge of our local, state, and federal governments. If we, the people, continue to support lawmakers who have no problem with food insecurity, homelessness, and lack of health care in what is considered a civilized society, there will be no peace. With peace comes joy, and that brings wholeness and the ability to be fully human. If people come to deeply believe in notions that promote peace, peace will follow like a shadow follows the body. Perhaps you think me hopelessly naive in believing in the possibility of lasting peace, but I think it is possible. And as John Lennon famously sang, I am not the only one. From my heart to yours, may it be so. Giving and receiving are linked together in the flow of the universe. In order to receive, one must first give. While we are unable to physically be inside of our church building, our financial responsibilities of maintenance, upkeep, and employee salaries continue. There are several ways to continue your monetary offerings. You can use the donate button on the website or send to the mailing address on the screen. Your generosity in any amount is greatly appreciated. Please be with me in mind, heart, and spirit as I offer these words. Let peace flow. Let us join in a spirit of quiet meditation. Let peace flow into you. Let it calm your troubled self, heal your needy self, help your angry self to remember to listen fully and compassionately to the other. Let peace flow around you until you walk with peace and speak words of peace and reflect all the radiance of this beautiful world. Let peace flow through you and beyond you. Let peace guide you and fill you with wisdom. Let it be the bridge that connects you, not just with people of goodwill, but also with people whose hearts are centered in their own needs and desires, who are not yet free to bring peace into their hearts. Let peace fill the world. Let it begin now, here, today. We ask this in the name of that power that dwells within us and beyond us, a power called by many names in many times and places, but whose universal name is love. May it be so.
Now, will you all join in singing this song, We'll Build a Land, with the words that echo our UUNB mission statement?
Extinguishing the light of our virtual chalice signals the end of worship, but we continue to carry the spark of light in our hearts. Go in peace. There's a spark of divinity that dwells within. Go forth and let that spark be a guide to your decisions, bring a ray of hope, fan the flames of passion, and spread the warm glow of love. May it be so.